My name is Jeffrey Sidoris, and this is Process Driven. Dutch street photographer Maarten Rots makes the kind of pictures that the graphic designer in me can't get enough of. His purposeful compositions are made up of strong lines, bold colors, and subtle overlapping textures, with just enough visual ambiguity to pull me in and ask myself, what is that? It's a type of work that I seldom grow tired of, and often find new details in the more I look at it. In his self-published magazine, Maarten Rots, Maarten's work takes on a completely different dimension when it's no longer confined to a phone or a browser, and it's exactly this project that I wanted to talk to him about. Here's my conversation with Maarten Rots.
Please listen carefully.
Let's dive into that for a second. We're talking about Maarten Rots, your print magazine. Mm-hmm. Was it a reaction to another project, or was it something that you decided, I need to do this so I always have something that I'm working on, whether or not there's a particular project that I'm focused on? I always have to be making photographs for this magazine.
That's definitely part of it. Absolutely. It's not the only reason I did it or started or keep it going. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely one of the reasons I started doing it is to have this thing that is like, yeah, there is this reason I have to not just make things, but also do like take a second and a third step with what I do. It is so not just taking pictures, but also looking back at what kind of pictures I'm taking and if there is some kind of coherence between all these pictures.
Why a print magazine, though? Why? I mean, in such a shifting landscape of photography, where social media is kind of king on a lot of levels, why shy away from that and say, nope, I've got to go back to print. I've got to go back to analog. I have to do something tangible.
That's it. I really need to have something in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I could do it just for me and make one copy and have one object, and that's it. But I also want to share it, and that's what you do with social media, or with your website or whatever digital other way of publishing your work and showing it to others. But yeah, this magazine really gave me a chance and a way to, look back at what I'm doing, for one thing. Also give me some reason to, or not, I have a reason to do what I do, but I'd like an extra reason to keep it going and keep myself sharp and really keep looking for something new, something that excites me and makes it more, not more interesting, but keeps it interesting for me. Mm-hmm. But next to that, there has to be a coherence and to sequence my work, to figure out a way that how do these images relate to each other? What kind of what does it do to each image if I put them in this order? If this one is the first and this one is the last, how does it work? If you would read this as a magazine, as a story, which is not a story, but like they do relate to each other, and
sure,
they tell something about what I'm looking at and the way I see the world, and so that's a reason to do it. But yeah, like I said, to have a physical object, to have something to hold on to and to put away or to take again, or have someone bump into it by accident, or so I really like that fact as well. It might just be lying around somewhere, and other people bump into it and they look at it, and of course it's really nice if they then see that it's me who made it, and they look into me and figure out who I am. But more important to me is that they have this moment of just seeing these images and maybe also having the same kind of experience that I have when I take these pictures. And of course, I take a lot of time and focus to try and make sure that the magazine does this, that it does give other people this kind of experience. I don't know if it does, because I've already had the experience. It's really hard to recreate it because I already know what it should do, but you try. And so yeah, I hope other people also see the magazine without even intending to do so. So just bumping into it and seeing it lie around, maybe at a friend's house or whatever, I sometimes leave a magazine somewhere where I think it's fit. um and yeah, hope it gives them something, and it stays with them, not just the images or me or my name or my work, but just a way of looking at the world around them. And yeah, maybe because I think that's one of the things, or the reasons, or the maybe also the goals or the ideas behind my work, is just that this is also reality. This is also how you can see the world around you, and it's some of the most beautiful images, in my opinion, that I take are coming from not so beautiful places, and I think that's an interesting metaphor.
Mm. Is there a temptation, you mentioned a minute ago about hoping that people will experience on some level what you were experiencing when you made the photograph? Is there ever a consideration of adding some sort of context, written context to the photographs to communicate a little more about what you were going through, or even just the locations that you were in surrounding the photographs?
I used to add locations and the year of production of that photograph, and usually there's a little bit of text on the back of the magazine. So
right, but not what I'm saying. Not on each image. Kind of what you were experiencing to help communicate that to the viewer. You. It sounds like you like the sort of ambiguity about letting them figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even that I really like that myself when I look at someone else's work, but also I don't think I don't think it adds to the experience if I would give more information about what I hope other people will experience. I really want to give it like open it up and just give it, and it's a bit like giving someone a meal and hoping they will enjoy it without telling them exactly what I've done to make it taste and yeah, feel the way it is. Maybe it's a bit like that.
So take me through the first issue, because like I said, I'm fascinated by this as not only a product, but as an exercise that you go through with each issue of the magazine. So what was going on? Were you printing a lot of your work beforehand and then decided to assemble it into a magazine, or what was going on with you creatively that led to that first issue of March and Rock?
I think with that first one, and I think that one also stands out a bit from the rest, actually. If you look at the content and the way it communicates, the theme of that one is, or the title, or whatever you want to call it, is surveil. So, and so surveillance is quite a topic within that one. And I think it's the only one that is quite a narrative magazine, actually. I think the rest is much more open. This one is quite clear on what I'm talking about.
Was the idea to make each issue narrative and to make each issue communicate a singular kind of theme?
Well, a theme, yes, that was the idea. But then you also notice after 5-6 zines that it becomes harder, because because I said to myself, okay, I want to have 4 issues a year. I usually I say people every 3 months, but that's not true. Sometimes it takes me longer, sometimes it's a bit shorter, but I aim to have 4 a year. But yeah, definitely the idea was to have a theme, or an area of interest that I wanted to explore, or that I noticed myself exploring. I wanted to illustrate within this this printed object. And with that first one, it was also yeah, surveillance was something that was a lot on my mind, not just like walking around the streets and noticing a lot of cameras, but just the whole idea of being watched, or and noticing that I myself as a photographer did actually the same.
Sure. Yeah. You're being watched and doing the watching.
I thought for a while about using the theme and make it more pointy and really make it very sharp, and like almost have like this Big Brother kind of title, but that didn't feel right for me.
Did it run the danger of maybe becoming too political or too overtly political? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm concerned in that in that area, and I have my ideas about it, but I don't want to be pushy. So I thought about it more, and then I figured out, okay, my what I do is actually the same. I photograph people, and I follow them for a while, or I wait at certain points in order to make sure that I can get some kind of beautiful, aesthetically beautiful image out of what is happening around me. So that's yeah, that's something that was a lot on my head when I was making this first issue.
Mm-hmm. And were you making these photographs with the intent of the magazine, or were you making and printing a body of work and decided kind of after the fact, or while it was in progress, to turn it into a magazine?
At a certain point, it became like the same, like it's almost like two roads coming together. It's like on the one hand, I was already thinking about making a zine and printing work, and on the other end, there was this theme on my head, in my head, on my mind, while I was taking pictures. So and that's the nice thing about making a zine and knowing that you have this kind of interest, this recurring pattern of things that are in your photographs. And in this case, it was the whole surveillance, looking at others and others looking at you, and this whole this theme.
Mm-hmm.
So both of them actually at the same time came together when I decided, okay, this is the best medium to go with it. And to be honest, the first zine was also the first print, the first edition was a tryout. It was just, let's see what it does. Let's see how many people are interested. If I could get shops to have it in their stores and sell it for me, and if people would like to subscribe, because I immediately offered that anyway. I just thought, okay, let's just go all in and see what happens. But it was also definitely a big fat tryout, and just I didn't have a clue if people were interested or if it was good enough at all. I mean, I had been working with a camera for a while, but I hadn't really been taking pictures in the way I was at that moment. And I just thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to do this. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, I can always turn it around. And if people are crazy enough to subscribe and I can't do it, I can probably work it out with them.
Right.
But, well, for some reason it worked. And for myself, it worked. I think that was the most important in the beginning, to see if I could get to a point where I was happy with what I had in my hands, and then I just let it out there, and you just let go of it, and you see what it does, how people react to it, and
what was
reactions
more challenging for you, making those initial photographs, or editing them down to what was appropriate to release as a zine?
Editing, absolutely. What I noticed is that for me, the best way to work is just print everything you have. Well, not everything you have, but like you have a selection. I work in Lightroom, so I flag every image that somehow or somewhat is okay enough to be printed, and I just print everything I flag on a very small scale, like A6, so that's like a quarter of a A4, small scale. And then I just have all these images, and I can just.
So you it's almost like you're creating like a mood board and seeing what fits and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then going back and forth all the time and making test prints of the magazine. Especially in the beginning, I did it much more, I must say, than now. With the first few issues, I made a lot of test issues. So I just went to the print shop and then printed dummies of the issues that I had in mind, and I kept them. It's nice to still have them and go back to them and see, okay, wow, which choices did I make, and why did I do it, and was it a good choice, or I still actually I'm still convinced that I actually made the right choices with the first one. Sometimes the first one, also because it was such a narrative, I think it is actually. If I look at all the not so well working versions that I had before, it's nice to see how I got there. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also a reason for me to print and to work on these kind of projects, to have something that you can go back to still. Like on one hand, I really like the idea of just doing it and there's no going back. Like if you're painting and you're going over your painting, you cannot scratch that layer off again and go
Sure.
back. So, but on the other hand, it is not like if you would do a painting and you took a lot of pictures in between, like you had a camera in your back and just had a lot of photographs of what you were doing, so you had some chance to see where you were going. Maybe for some people it wouldn't work at all. For me, I think it would be nice to just see, wow, these are the choices I made and this is where I got. Although I must say, I don't think about it that often. But now that I'm talking to you about this, and especially the first 3-4 issues, and it's getting, well, it's not getting easier at all. But I did get more into a kind of in the flow. It's not really a flow because it's like it comes back. It's almost like a cycle of waves. Like there's a wave coming every so many seconds, and then the wave disappears, which is when the magazine's there, and it just and then the next wave comes, and I have to, and then you get to this highest point of the wave, and it crashes again, and that's when, like, it's almost like
well,
that.
hopefully it doesn't crash, Maarten.
Well, the crashing is the publishing.
Right.
That's when it's finished, and it gets on the land, and it gets well, other people get to enjoy it or get to see it, but it's not getting easier really, but it is getting a bit more. I understand my process a little bit better.
Has your production process changed drastically or in any significant way since you produced the first issue?
Has it? Well, because I was traveling quite a bit lately, I wasn't always able to print. So what I did in the beginning often was just print everything I had and
are
start
you
puzzling.
printing yourself, or are you sending out to have things printed?
Well, if I print these kinds of small prints, I just do it at a print shop. It's not about having a perfect image. It's really about having a representation of the image. So I can puzzle with it. I can combine and I can play around. And sometimes actually what happens, they turn upside down because they're lying on the floor of my studio. And then they become a new image because they're upside down.
Sure.
And I can find them back in my catalog. It's happened a couple times that I just
you can't find the image because it's flipped.
Yeah, it's really it's such a, the first time this happened to me, it was such a weird experience. I was like, wow, this is perfect combination I have here. I was like, and I was trying to find it, I couldn't find it back anymore. Yeah. So yeah, but lately that's just because I've been traveling a lot. My wife and I, we have a small camper van, a VW transporter, and we've been driving through Europe the past 1.5 year a lot. Well, not all the time, but a lot. And that's when that's one of the reasons we do this, is for me to take more pictures, find new spots. I really like to react on where I am, and but then I don't have a printer with me, and of course I don't even print these pictures myself, but also I don't have space to have all these small images.
Yeah, you can't have boxes and boxes in your transporter.
Yeah, I could. If I really wanted to, I could do that, but then I don't have the space to put them, like to look at them at the same time, because I really want to see 200 images at the same time and just get into this strange flow and just, I don't know, forget about everything and just look at what I have and combine. And I mean, it's a magical process. I really like doing it. I love doing it. Actually, now talking about it, I'm really longing to start doing it again.
And it sounds like seeing those images all together, whether it's on a wall or spread out on the floor, is really an integral part of your workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. and that's something that I've started to let go a little bit of because of practical reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes me work in a different way. And I think in a way it's also good because looking at the last two issues that I have, I'm really happy with what I have accomplished with those. So it's not necessarily that it's that the outcome
Mm-hmm.
is less, but the process of working on it, which is just as important to me, or maybe even more, well, much more important actually, is that's why I do it. I love doing it. That's why I do it. I don't do it because I want to have this final thing. I just
Sure.
want to do this thing. um, yeah, I think I miss that a bit, and so I'm really figuring out like how can I find some kind of in between, like in between digital and physical kind of way to work on this.
Mm-hmm. And experience them in the same way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure,
Because the
sure.
nice thing is on the floor, if you have all these small prints, you can just have them all scattered around you,
Right.
and someone walks in and it messes up again. But something can happen even there. You can get combinations you would have never thought of
Sure.
just because of coincidence. Whether it's you or someone else or the weather or whatever, like the wind blowing in. The nice thing is also when you mix it, it's really hard to go back. And I've tried, of course, taking pictures in between, like with my phone, just to have like, oh wow, these combinations were nice, but you never go back to those. You're not even, at least me, I'm not even looking at these pictures anymore. It's really
Hmm.
the physical process. It's like, well, here we go with the food again, but it's like cooking. You just do it, and within the doing, it happens. It doesn't happen thinking at it or about it or looking back at it, or it's the moment. And yeah.
When you had a show, a print show earlier in the year, did you
Mhm.
approach that end product? Was that an issue of March and Rock? It was just larger and on the wall. I mean, did you approach it creatively in the same way?
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Definitely. It's also, I mean, some of these images came to be while doing one of the issues of March and Rock, because, well, the whole theme of this show was turning my images upside down or whatever direction I wanted them to be. This Side Up was the title of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something, I mean, I came to the title from a different kind of story, but for me the core was that just my images sometimes would end up upside down and become something else and more interesting or
Hopefully,
more
you've figured
connected.
out a way to tag them so you can find them in the future.
I've turned them in my catalog now, actually. But yeah, it's the same kind of way of working. And then looking at, like, for the magazine, I print them really small, and then for the show, at a certain point there was this selection which was much broader than the images that really became part of the show. So I had bigger prints, and then you do the same thing. And then at a certain point, I do go back to the computer, and then I rebuild the walls of the place where I'm going to show these works, and make a sketch of how I would like everything to hang. Much like how I go ahead when I made a selection for the magazine, and go into InDesign and make the zine. Just yeah, but really make the spreads. But then with what happens when you make a show, you're gonna change it anyway.
Right.
It's not gonna be what you thought it was gonna be.
Do you experience it differently? The shows,
Uh,
like, do you experience a larger version of your work differently than you experience being able to hold it in your hand, or is it regardless because it's printed? That's the experience. That's the key to it. That it's analog.
Yeah, I experience it different on two levels. Like on one level, because it's bigger and you see more detail and you see it, like a larger part of your field of view gets taken by the image. But also the material that I print on is well, for these shows, it's a Hanemühle paper. It's I want to say the German etching, but I haven't been using that lately. It's the photo rag, but they're comparable kinds of paper, like super textured and very fragile kinds of papers. And once you print on those materials, you have to handle the print in a very different way. Like if I have these simple small prints for my magazine, it's just from the print shop. It was an A4 and there were 4 images on it, and I cut it in 4, and it's already been handled, and I don't value that particular print anymore. So it's just a
it loses
representation
that
of the
sense of preciousness to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I can just do with it whatever I want. I can make marks on it. I really aim to crop my images in camera and do everything in camera, but sometimes you do make a mark on an image, like I have to lose this little bit of whatever it is on the edge of the image, because that just makes it that little bit better. So I do that with a pen. I just make a little mark. I try not to crop too much, but yeah, sometimes, I mean, in the end, you want to have an image that works, and it's 2 parts of the process. It's taking the picture, and it's producing the final image. So that's what I do with these images. But if I have them printed in a large scale, of course, all those decisions have been made. So that's also part of it. But then, yeah, they are on very precious material, and I have to handle them in a different way. I have to be very careful when I put them away. I have to wear white gloves, these cotton gloves.
Sure, yeah.
Miming all the time with my pictures.
Photographer stuck in a box.
Exactly. It's kind of fun, actually. But yeah, it's a different way of working with your images. But yeah, absolutely, having them physical is such a different way of working with your pictures than just having them on a screen. I think that's a big realization I had after having the magazine for the first time, and that's also a reason to keep doing it. And sometimes it's super hard to get to the new one. Like a year ago, I had to I postponed one issue because I couldn't do it at that moment. It just didn't work.
Logistically, or was it a creative block?
Oh yeah, it was creative block. It's not necessarily a block, because block sounds so immovable. Like it's almost like you can't do anything about it. But it's more like I had a hard time with it. Just yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a creative block. Okay.
What got you past it?
Just doing it.
Just moving ahead.
Yeah, just doing it anyway, and knowing like I have all these images, and they're good images. I know because otherwise I wouldn't have taken them and selected them afterwards and printed them and looked at them. So trusting that, although it sounds weird actually now that I'm saying it myself, but it is like you've already made all these steps towards that moment that you've printed them, so they've become potential part of one of the magazines.
Yeah, you've already made creative and editorial choices, and you've already had to rely on your skill set and your eye to produce the images initially.
Yeah. The thing is just that I think what happened with this particular issue is that I didn't have a very clear idea of what I was doing when I was taking these pictures. Like the last 2 issues, I'm actually talking about the one before those 2. But the last 2, I was like quite clear about where I was going. I was in a flow. I saw new things. I saw certain patterns, textures, shadow shapes, whatever, like clear in my head what kind of compositions I was after, and I didn't really have to convince myself of where I was going, or have the feeling of having to convince someone else of what I was doing. And with this particular issue, it was just like, wow, where am I going with this one? It was yeah, so I had to put it felt a bit like I had to put meaning on these images, although there's not really meaning in any of the images.
In the sense of sort of manufacturing a meaning, or what do you mean?
I think it felt like that for me. It wasn't really like that, but it felt to me like, okay, wow, I have this amount of images. I would like to say series, but it's not a series because
Mm-hmm.
they were in my head, they weren't coherent. I think that was the problem. So I didn't feel like where they were connecting and where I was going at that moment. So I was creating, but I didn't know where I was going. It's a bit like I was driving a car, but I was just driving,
Just driving for the sake of driving.
yeah, just
Yeah.
taking turns at random. I didn't really know where I wanted to end up. And it actually, if I think about actual driving in the van, that's what I love doing most. It's just driving without really thinking about where I want to go
But in your
and bumping
work,
into.
you're on the other
Yeah.
side. Wow, that's interesting.
So it's a weird kind of. I don't know if duality is the right way to describe it, but it's an two opposites, but they have to exist together. I think.
What finally made that body of work come together, or did it come together?
I'm still in discussion with myself about that one. I like it. I like each individual image of that issue, but maybe it's because I know what I went through. Like, wow, what I went through sounds so dramatical, but
Right. How
but I
did you
know
get through it, Maarten?
Oh man, it was such a. I think it's a bit like if someone has been training for something for years and then they do that thing and it just works. You don't have to think about it anymore. It's just, and you're happy about it. That's what you hope for,
Sure.
and that's what you want, and that's where you want. That's why you do what you do. Probably, at least for me, it's like that. It's like that feeling is awesome. That's the best thing. That's the best feeling I know. It's like when things come together, when it's there's no friction, even though you need that as well. But like this moment of not having to pull it out or push it out, like really having like all this friction.
Well, I think there are different kinds of friction. I mean, you can, to use a woodworking kind of metaphor, you can use 60 grit sandpaper and it's going to tear up that surface, whereas you can use 220 and it will refine the surface. You're still going through a similar motion, a similar process, but there's nuance there, and it sounds like that nuance is sort of the love-hate relationship that you sometimes have with the work, because you can see the changes or see the result of it, but it just doesn't sometimes go where you think it wants to or needs to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just to use the sanding paper metaphor, if you sand it away, it's gone. And sometimes it's like, if I do this, can I still go back or not? They're like, physically you could still go back. Like, yeah, you have, like, that's a nice thing with photographs, you still have all these images, you
Sure.
can still go back and then grab them again, but in your head you've made steps already, and
Right.
you've discarded an image, or you have a certain relationship to an image, and you don't feel as if it would work in the context that you would like to have it in.
When you look at each issue, and I know we're spending a lot of time on March and Rock, but it's one of the things that I've really most wanted to talk to you about, because it runs so contrary to where much of photography is at. Everything is social media driven, everything is screen driven. We're looking at it on our devices, on our phones, our computers, but you have placed such value and such importance on the printed photograph as the ultimate representation of that photograph. I find that fascinating, and I find it hopeful, because I love print as well. I don't print nearly as often as I either could or should, but I find it fascinating that you're creating these markers, if you will, of your personal and creative life as you keep moving through the practice of photography.
Yeah, I've always been a bit hesitant with the whole social media thing anyway. I use it, and I don't hate it or whatever, but it's just not. It doesn't feel like it's. It feels like one way to show what you're doing, but it's such a flimsy thing. It's just it's there and it's gone. I mean, of course, if you go on Instagram and you look up my profile, then you can see all my images at the same time. But if you use Instagram the way it is designed to be, you just go through a whole stream of images, and well, really, you don't look at most images more than half a second.
Sure.
And I blame myself sometimes. Well, I'm just going through images, like, wow, I'm liking an images, one image, and it's just, did I really look at it? And so I try to be very clear about this to myself and go back and actually really look at what I'm doing. So what I also did for a while was actually, instead of just liking something, just very consciously just leaving a comment on each image that I would look at, just for myself, and not because I want other people to see what I would say about an image, but just for myself to have, like, take a step back and look a little bit longer and really realize what you're looking at.
Just to let yourself know what you found interesting or why you found that engaging or compelling. Sure.
Yeah. And I don't know if that actually should be in the shape of, or in the form of, a comment, but that works. That's the way the world of well, at least Instagram, but also other social media is made up of. So I think that's where it works in this context. And but yeah, just to take one step back and think about it, and just put in words what is at that point maybe just some kind of chemical reaction in your brain, because you either like something or not, and then this liking gets translated in you double tapping an image on a phone screen, which is really small and maybe has a blue light filter on it because it's late at night or whatever. Like, it's become something else than it actually is. And so printing an image does something. The time spent with an image, I think, is different anyway with something printed. And but I mean, of course, I'd make 100 magazines of each. Like, each edition has 100 editions. So definitely, I'm hoping for other people to look at it. I have people subscribing, so I'm sure that at least a bunch of people will see it every time. But it's also really for me to become really more familiar with what I am doing, and like, I apply the same kind of logic to my own images as what I do. Well, for at least for a while, what I did is just really looking at what I'm looking at and translating this sensation of looking into words, at least for me, and just make it a bit more that you can hold on to, or that you can communicate about, and just so I think a printed image gives you more time. Yeah, I think it really has to do with time. Time is definitely the most important reason. And time, not just in the sense of spending time with that one image, but also sequencing and combining. Not just sequencing in the sense that this is the one that you should see after the one that you saw before, or but also just having them in one space, and it can be a physical space as an exhibition space. But the magazine, I think, is also a space. And it's, I mean, a lot of people go from the back to the front, it's in Dutch they say it's like the farmer's way of looking at a book. You start at the end and then you go back, and it's just like, but you spend time with the images, and it's that's something that is important to me, I think. And then next to the spending time is also what happens if you combine images. If you just see one image as a single image, it tells a completely different story than when another image is added. And well, lately I've been working quite on an abstract level, I think, with my images. But still, I tell stories, and not narrative stories, but I tell something about the way I see the world and the way other people can also see the world. I mean, what you see in my images is there. It's not like I'm putting together a set and having all kinds of lights, so I have this image. No, it's just there. I see it, and I register it. I capture it with the camera, and then I print it in a magazine. If you have another one next to it, which is maybe showing a similar way of looking at the world, or a similar way of how the images build up, it shows something about that it is not a coincidence, that it's there, that anyone can see it. And it's not about capturing it. Well, I capture it because I feel the need to capture it, but I don't think everyone who looks at my magazines is someone who also wants to photograph. It's just people who want to enjoy images or visual information.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that what they get out of it is the idea that, yeah, this is also what the world looks like, or can look like, or is. Yeah.
Well, there is this idea, and I mentioned this on an episode of On Taking Pictures, this book that I'm reading by Wim Wenders called Once, where he talks about the camera. Every exposure takes two photographs, or takes two images, and there's the image that happens in the front of the camera that actually gets recorded, but then there's the image that he says gets fired basically in reverse, capturing the mind of the photographer who made the image. And I find that fascinating, that we often only concentrate on the end result as what was in front of the camera, not that mindset or thought process, or whether it's a visual exercise or an aesthetic exercise or some sort of commentary, what was in the photographer's mind when he or she was making that photograph. And it sounds like that is something that whether conscious or subconscious is seeping out into your work, of your point of view, your sort of thought process in going into making this image. And I think that happens even more with the multiple exposure images that you're doing.
What do you mean with the multiple exposure images?
Well, when you're in the way that you sequence images,
yeah.
rather than just thinking about one photograph, you're thinking about an arc of how to experience this scene, this setting, this narrative. Again, whether it's a literal narrative or a metaphorical narrative, it seems to be that you're thinking about how we experience what you were going through when you were making the pictures, not just the end results of here are a set of pictures.
Yeah, and it's not even that I think that my way of looking or my way of thinking is such an important thing, but I can't deny it. It's there, and I think it is an important part of the image, like you say. Like, there is these two images or these two ways of looking at a picture, and I want that to be there. I think it's a very important thing, because it's not stock photography. It's not meant to be a placeholder for an idea. It is.
We will never see "Girl on Beach" from Maarten Rots.
No, well, maybe in a very conceptual work someday, in 20 years.
Yeah.
No, I'm afraid not. No. But actually, that's an interesting thing you say now, because that's another thing that is on your mind when you do this thing. You know that people have a certain idea of what you do.
Sure, there's an expectation.
Yeah, and what do you do with that? Because on the one hand, it's like, yeah, well, I'm the artist here. I'm doing what I do, and you just decide what you do with it as a viewer.
But
on the other hand,
you get into these exercises. Like I would love to see, sort of your reaction photographically to somebody like Martin Parr, who is very sort of literal and great work, but
absolutely.
You are the sort of conceptual other side of the coin of that. And I would love to see your photographic reactions to some of that work. If you were going to say, okay, I'm going to take these 5 Martin Parr pictures and interpret them and sort of reshoot them through my own lens, what would that look like? And I think it would be fascinating.
Yeah, Martin Parr has been one of my favorite photographers for a really long time, actually. I really like his work,
but it's so different, right? From what you do.
It's completely different.
It's
a
completely
but it's
different
also,
process.
It is actually. I never started out trying to do what he does, but I did start out as a street photographer.
Mm-hmm.
But with what most people would consider wrong gear, because I was walking around with a big camera, and most people say, okay, you need a small camera if you want to do it.
What were you walking around with?
With my Canon EOS 6D, which I still use today,
and people were telling you, no, you need a Leica.
Well, that's at least if you, yeah, exactly. You need a Leica, man.
If you're gonna shoot street and be serious, you have to have a Leica.
Yeah, that's a bit the way. At least that's how some people think, and
Sure.
I think it does truth to it, of course, because it's more hidden and it's less obtrusive. You don't have to, people don't get bothered by it and so on. But I figured out that just shooting people, and then Maarten Parr has a certain kind of, there's this it's not Bruce Gilden.
Right. No, very different. It's definitely more subdued and intentional, I think.
Yeah. It's like Bruce Gilden is Maarten Parr on coke and speed and a couple of other things. but there is this very clear idea of photographing where we are, the human condition, if you want to, in the Western world, on a very straightforward level.
Sure, very literal.
Showing what it is.
Yeah.
Like, this is what it is.
Did that ever interest you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
That's yeah. And
what
I
changed?
think it still shows through in the first issue of Maarten Rots. I can't just do that. I don't know how to do that. Just shoot people like with a camera, not with something else.
Thank you for the clarification.
Just to make sure, yeah. No, I have a really hard time doing it. It's just I'm not comfortable doing it. It's not in my personality to do that. I tried it for a while, and that's actually when I got interested in using reflections. Mm-hmm. So using reflective surfaces to have human
as a means to avoid having to interface directly with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So it was one level sort of removed from a direct confrontation.
Yeah, but the strange thing is also, if I don't have a camera in my hands, I don't have a problem with this at all. But once I start having a camera in my hands, you become someone else, or you don't become someone else, but people think you have different intentions.
Sure.
Because you're recording something. It's not just something that happens and it's gone. It's recorded also.
Mm-hmm.
It's not interaction and it's over. So yeah, this using reflections, like windows or whatever other kinds of reflective surfaces you have in a city around you. You have lots of options, of course. That started out, it started to become a way to have people in my photographs without having to face them, like literally, and having this awkwardness. From there on, humans became like humans. That already starts to sound like I'm very much apart from it. Like right. The human species became.
That's right. Maarten Rots, photographer / sociopath.
Exactly. Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, people. I've learned to say people. People became less interested for me to have in my photographs, and I started to see the potential of just the compositions.
Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself becoming more interested in your own work the less you included people? Was there that sort of divergence in a way?
Yeah, and also because I didn't feel like it's almost like a burden, but the burden sounds also extremely dark. But like it's almost like this. There's this. If you have the idea that someone else is looking at what you're doing while you're doing it, it's really hard to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so not having that anymore, I just had a very much easier time taking the photographs that I wanted to take.
Mm-hmm. And could you immediately see the work? And again, super arbitrary term, but could you immediately see the work as better than before without including people in it? Did it speak to you on a different kind of level creatively or aesthetically?
Yeah, but I think in a way that's also because the way I would be behaving, apparently, when I would try to take pictures of people would behave in a different way.
Sure. So the process itself became more enjoyable for you, not just the end product.
Yeah, and also because people have expressions, or they show it because of the way their body is, their body language is in an image.
Mm-hmm.
I influence it as a photographer. So
Sure.
those images immediately have a certain feel or a certain look, or not a look, yeah, a certain feel, I think is the best way to describe it.
Sure.
And you lose that when you don't have people in it anymore, and you start to focus on other things. Yeah, it becomes more about the aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm looking at qualities like composition, light, shadow, color, those kind of things. I can strip away one whole layer. So for me, that's easier. Other people would say, like, I wouldn't know what to do with couldn't photograph people. But yeah, for me, that definitely
That was
makes it
more of a
less
barrier.
hard.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, like I said, in the normal with life without a camera in my hands, I'm having a good time with people around me. It's not a barrier at all. It's not a problem. But that's also the thing with street photography. I don't like to have permission. I want to
Mm-hmm.
do it when it happens. And that's what I still do. Like what I show you in my photographs is what I've seen. It's not what I've created and then photographed, but it is what I've bumped into, what I've come onto, and that's what it's reality. So this
Mm-hmm.
is reality as I see it. So I don't want to ask people, "Hey, can I take your photograph? Could you
Right. Right.
position
You don't want to
yourself over there?"
manufacture the scene. You'd rather observe the scene and capture that observing.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
the thing and I think that's maybe also me interpreting the so-called rules of
Sure.
how it
Sure.
should be if you do street photography. It is a form of documentary, and
Mm-hmm.
documentary can still be very much a produced thing and doesn't have to be bad at all. But for me, it has to be reality as it is happening in front of me
So it really
or
does get you
behind me.
back to that idea of surveillance. Your entire body of work, on some level, is you sort of surveilling the world around you.
Ah, nice. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but it is true. A surveillance camera captures what is just
It's objective.
it's not
It
it's
just
not just judging. It's just showing you what is there.
yeah.
Yeah, it's objective, but then of course it becomes subjective because I am taking the pictures and not just a camera with no agent behind it. Like agent in the sense that like not an agent, not a policeman, but like no agency behind it.
Do you see yourself maybe more objective when you're taking the pictures and more subjective when you're arranging a sequence? Is
No,
there
I think you're right already with the first one.
Mhm.
Like I try to not take too many pictures.
Okay.
I try to really think about what kind of picture. So I don't want to go home with 20 pictures of the same scene. It does happen for a good reason. Then I've been walking around it, whatever. But I don't want to have 5 different options of almost the same picture. So there is some kind of subjectivity happening when I'm taking and of course there's a lot of subjectivity happening because I'm attracted to that picture. But the most of the subjectiveness is applied when I'm making the choices. Absolutely.
Hmm.
That's where it happens. It's much more objective when I'm walking around. And I have this idea like this is what I'm looking for, this is what attracts me, and that's why I write about it sometimes. Just to sharpen my vision or my vision sounds like there's a vision, but it's more like my actual vision, what
Yeah.
my eyes
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
You know? But I've always been looking, and I think the fact that I was taking a lot of pictures when I just started, it was also I didn't know what I was doing with the camera.
Sure.
Like I took pictures before, but it was mostly for practical reasons, to document something or to have a registration of something else that I did, but not to take a picture for the sake of having that image as a final
Mm-hmm.
product, final work, final image. Um, so when I started really becoming serious about taking photographs, yeah, I took a lot of pictures, but that's also because I was really figuring out the technicalities behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would just have the aperture open completely all the time because then I didn't have to. There would always be enough light,
Right.
and I didn't have a clue Like, and it sounds so silly now, but no one ever told me what happens if you close down the aperture. And I know now, and I know what I'm doing, and I know why I focus on something, like really focusing with the camera on something. When I'm focusing on something, I know why I'm doing that. It's not just a random, like, oh yeah, this is the subject, I'm focusing on it. No, I know if I focus on something in a reflection, for example, that something else in that reflection will also be in focus.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a clue in the beginning, so I had to take a lot of pictures in the beginning, and I kept them all just in case. But doesn't really matter anymore now. But I would look at them all the time, and that's the nice thing about having digital photography, that you have metadata, that you can see what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
You know why the image came out
So
the way it came out.
you would go back and look at images and go, oh, this is why that happened, and try and deconstruct what was going on in your pictures.
Yeah. I still do that. Although I really kick myself now if I mess up, because I feel I shouldn't, because I know what I'm doing, so I shouldn't mess up, but I do anyway. And there's always new things, and you'd never know everything. So
But
you're
sometimes
learning.
messing up gets you further than if you hadn't.
Yeah, true. And that's also, like, I actually, for a really short time, maybe just one day, I went back to opening up my aperture again. So I was shooting at f4, because I was in a very dark, literally dark space, and I just had to take photographs, and I didn't want to push my ISO. And then I figured out, like, well, I actually really like that there is this shallow depth of field, and that there is a lot of soft parts in the image, which I've tried to avoid for a really long time. Like, I want everything to be more or less in focus, or to be sharp, or to be like straight and strong.
Sure. Well, that's another level of storytelling, though, isn't it? You're deciding what you want the viewer to focus, literally, to focus on first.
Yeah, so it's something that I'm thinking about. Like, how can I use this practically? Like, how can I use this to my advantage, so the images tell what I want them to tell?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I used it practically because just that was the way I could only use my camera at that point when I discovered it again. But now, yeah, how can I use it so it communicates, and it literally focuses people on a part of the image that I want them to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're willing to explore it, though. It sounds like you're willing to let your photography, with a gentle handhold anyway, let it go kind of where it wants to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason I'm doing this, is I can try new things. I don't have to go to the office every day and do what I've been doing for the past 20 years and keep doing it for another 20, 25 years. And that's my life. No, I really want to try new things. And sometimes maybe they are not so nice, and I can go a step back, or I go a step to the side and find something new. But yeah, just this possibility to do everything that I would like to. Well, not everything, but yeah, like anything, just see whatever, and just try it. And if it doesn't work out, then well, what's the worst that happened? You spend some time on it, and you probably actually learned something, even if it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to. I'm pretty sure, at least in my case, I learned something. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what it is then, and trying to put your finger on it and use that to your advantage. In that next step, use what you've learned. That's what I love. That's why I do this.
If you'd like to see some of Maarten Rots' work for yourself, head over to his website at maartenrots.nl. That's MAARTENROTS.nl. You can also follow Maarten on Instagram, also at Maarten Rots. And if you would like to pick up a copy, or better yet, subscribe to Maarten's magazine, March and Rock, you'll find links on his website, or you can head over to marchandrock.com. Subscribe to Process Driven on iTunes or in your favorite podcast app. Just search for Process Driven. And if you'd like to connect with me on Instagram or Twitter, you'll find me at Jeffrey Saddoris. That's Jeffrey Saddoris. You can pick up a copy of my book, Photography by the Letter, either as a paperback or a downloadable ebook at photographybytheletter.com. And I've got a brand new show called Iterations. You can listen to the first episode on my website at jeffreysaddoris.com or by searching for Iterations in your favorite podcast app. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will talk to you on the next one.